The cassette was labeled "Stolen Property" in permanent marker. Tom Brennan, owner of Melody Music Shop in Aberdeen, Washington, held it like evidence in a murder trial. Kurt Cobain stood there, 17 years old, skinny as a rail, wearing a flannel shirt 3 sizes too big, and he could feel every eye in the store burning into him. It was September 1984, and Tom had just accused Kurt of stealing a blank cassette containing what Kurt claimed was his first original recording. "I didn't steal anything," Kurt said quietly, his voice barely audible over the classic rock playing through the store's speakers. "That's my tape. I recorded those songs myself." Tom Brennan was a big man, 53 years old, with arms like tree trunks from years of moving amplifiers and drum kits. He had a reputation in Aberdeen for not tolerating shoplifters, and right now he was convinced he had one standing in front of him. "Bull," he said loudly, making sure other customers could hear. "You stole this from my inventory yesterday. I got you on camera walking out with it." Kurt's face flushed red. He hadn't stolen anything. He'd bought that blank cassette 3 days earlier with money he'd saved from mowing lawns. He'd spent 2 nights in his aunt's basement recording 4 original songs, pouring everything he had into those recordings. The tape was precious to him, maybe the most important thing he owned. But now, this store owner was accusing him of theft in front of a dozen people, and Kurt didn't know how to prove his innocence. "I bought that tape here on Saturday," Kurt insisted, his voice shaking. "I can show you the receipt." "It's at home." "Convenient," Tom sneered. "Look, kid, I've been running this store for 22 years. I know every shoplifter's excuse in the book. You either pay for this tape right now, or I'm calling the cops." Kurt felt tears forming in his eyes, which made him angry at himself. He was 17, trying to be taken seriously as a musician, and here he was about to cry in a music store. But that tape, those 4 songs, they represented months of work, hours of practice, everything he'd been trying to say through music but couldn't say with words. "Those songs are mine," Kurt said, his voice getting stronger even as tears started running down his face. "I wrote them. I sang them. I played every instrument on those recordings. That's not your property. It's mine." "Then you won't mind paying for it again," Tom said, holding out his hand. $5, or I call the police." Kurt didn't have $5. He had 87 cents in his pocket, which was supposed to buy him lunch for the next 3 days. He was living with his aunt because his parents had split up, and neither of them wanted him full-time. He was barely making it through high school. And now, this man was going to call the cops on him for stealing something that was actually his. "I can't," Kurt whispered. "I don't have the money." Tom picked up the phone. "That's what I thought. Aberdeen police, please." What happened next would haunt Tom Brennan for the next 10 years, though he wouldn't realize it until much later. Kurt, in a moment of desperation and rage, lunged across the counter and grabbed the tape from Tom's hand. Then he ran. He ran out of Melody Music Shop, down the street, through the parking lot behind the library, and didn't stop until he reached the abandoned building near the river where he sometimes went to be alone. Tom had chased him for about half a block before giving up and returning to call the police. He filed a report for shoplifting and assault. The tape was valued at $5. The Aberdeen police issued a citation for Kurt Cobain, who didn't show up for his court date because by then he'd moved in with a friend and wasn't getting mail at his aunt's house anymore. A warrant was issued. It stayed active for years, one of those small-town warrants that nobody really enforces but never goes away. Kurt kept that tape. He listened to it hundreds of times over the next few years, always remembering the humiliation of that day in the music store. The feeling of being accused, not believed, treated like a criminal for trying to protect something he'd created. That feeling of powerlessness would find its way into many of his songs. The anger, the frustration, the sense that the world was set up to crush people like him. By 1986, Kurt had formed Nirvana with Krist Novoselic. They were playing small shows, building a following in the Pacific Northwest underground scene. By 1989, They'd recorded Bleach for Sub Pop Records. By 1991, Nevermind had exploded into mainstream consciousness, and Kurt Cobain had become, against his own wishes, the voice of a generation. Tom Brennan didn't make the connection at first. He'd seen the name Kurt Cobain in newspapers and magazines, heard "Smells Like Teen Spirit" on the radio. But Aberdeen had produced a few minor celebrities over the years, and Tom didn't pay much attention to rock music anymore. He was in his 60s now, thinking about retirement, running his music store the same way he'd always run it. Then one day in October 1993, a young customer came in wearing a Nirvana t-shirt. "You know Kurt Cobain's from Aberdeen, right?" the kid said. "He probably came into this store when he was young." Tom looked at the name on the t-shirt, Kurt Cobain. Something clicked in his memory. That skinny kid who'd tried to steal a cassette tape, the one who'd run out of the store crying. That was almost 10 years ago now. Tom went to his office and pulled out old police reports he kept filed away. There it was, September 1984. Kurt Cobain, shoplifting and assault, $5 cassette tape. Tom Brennan felt something he hadn't expected to feel. Shame. That kid hadn't been lying. Those songs on that tape probably were his. And Tom had called him a thief, humiliated him, chased him down the street, filed criminal charges against him. The kid who'd gone on to sell 30 million albums had been telling the truth, and Tom hadn't believed him. But here's what nobody talks about. Here's what changed everything. In December 1993, Nirvana played a secret acoustic show at a small venue in Olympia, Washington, about an hour from Aberdeen. It was billed as a friends and family show, intimate and private, a break from the massive arena tours they'd been doing. Tom Brennan learned about it through his daughter, who'd managed to get tickets through a friend of a friend. Tom did something he'd never done before. He closed his store early, drove to Olympia, and stood outside the venue, not with a ticket, but with something else. He'd brought that police report from 1984. He'd brought a handwritten letter, and he'd brought $5 in an envelope. He waited by the backstage entrance for 3 hours. Security told him to leave twice. He stayed anyway. Finally, as the show was ending, someone came out, and Tom handed them the envelope with the letter and asked them to give it to Kurt Cobain. He didn't expect anything to happen. He just needed to do it. The letter said, "Kurt, I'm the owner of Melody Music Shop in Aberdeen. In September 1984, I accused you of stealing a cassette tape. I called you a liar. I filed police charges against you. I was wrong. You were 17 years old and trying to protect your music, and I treated you like a criminal. I'm sorry. I've enclosed the $5 I tried to make you pay for your own tape. I wish I could give you back your dignity from that day, but since I can't, I'm asking if you would let me make this right somehow. I was wrong about you. I'm sorry." Tom drove home that night, thinking he'd never hear anything back. Why would Kurt Cobain remember some music store owner from Aberdeen who'd humiliated him a decade ago? The guy was a massive rock star now. He had better things to think about. 3 weeks later, Tom Brennan received a phone call at his store. The woman on the other end said she was calling from Nirvana's management company. Kurt Cobain wanted to know if Tom would be willing to come to a show in Seattle in January, not as a regular attendee. Kurt wanted Tom backstage. Tom almost hung up, thinking it was a prank. But the woman was persistent, professional, and eventually Tom agreed. January 8, 1994, Seattle Center Arena. Tom walked backstage more nervous than he'd ever been. He was led to a room where Kurt sat on a couch, holding an acoustic guitar. "Tom Brennan," Kurt said, standing, "the man who taught me an important lesson." Tom started to apologize, but Kurt held up his hand. "That day in your store, when you accused me of stealing my own tape, when you made me feel like nothing, that day changed my life." Tom's heart sank. Maybe Kurt had brought him here to confront him. But what Kurt said next surprised him. "You made me realize nobody was going to believe in my music unless I made them believe in it. That day, I ran out with that tape because I knew if I let you keep it, I'd regret it forever. Your disbelief made me more determined to prove my music was worth protecting. That pain, that anger, that powerlessness, that's in almost every song I've written since. Kurt walked over to Tom. So here's what I want to do. Tonight, I'm going to tell this story to 18,000 people. I'm going to tell them about the music store owner who accused me of stealing my own tape. Then, I'm bringing you on stage, and you're going to tell your side. We're going to show people that mistakes don't define us, that apologies matter, and that the people who hurt us can teach us. Tom was shaking. I can't go out there. Yes, you can, Kurt said. Because I did. I went out in front of your store and you made me feel worthless, so now you're going to come out on my stage and feel vulnerable too. Then we're even. That night, 18,000 people filled the arena. Nirvana played an explosive set. Then Kurt stopped and told the story, the cassette tape, the accusation, the humiliation, running away with his own music clutched in his hand. Then Kurt called Tom Brennan onto the stage. Tom walked out, legs barely working, and stood next to Kurt in front of 18,000 silent people. This is Tom Brennan, Kurt said. He owns Melody Music Shop in Aberdeen. 10 years ago he thought I was a thief. He was wrong. But he wrote me apologizing. He came to find me. He took responsibility. That's more than most people do. Kurt turned to Tom. Tell them what you told me. Tom took the microphone with shaking hands. He told them he was wrong. He told them he was sorry. He told them he'd let assumptions about a poor kid override what should have been obvious, that Kurt had been telling the truth. And he'd spent 10 years not knowing he'd crushed someone who just needed to be believed. The arena was silent. Then someone started clapping. More joined. Within seconds, 18,000 people applauded not for Kurt, but for a music store owner who'd had the courage to admit he was wrong. Kurt put his arm around Tom's shoulders. That's real strength. Not pretending you're perfect. Admitting when you're not. Tom left that stage with tears streaming down his face, not tears of shame anymore. Tears of relief, of forgiveness, of a second chance he didn't deserve but desperately needed. After the show, Kurt gave Tom a cassette tape. The label read, Aberdeen Demo, September 1984. Original recordings by Kurt Cobain, not stolen. I made a copy years ago, Kurt said. I wanted you to have the original. Maybe put it up in your store. Remind people that sometimes the things we're most sure about are the things we're most wrong about. Tom returned to Aberdeen with that tape. He framed it and hung it behind the counter with a plaque. Kurt Cobain's first recording. I almost threw this away because I didn't believe in him. Don't make my mistake. Believe in people, especially the ones who seem like they have nothing. The story spread through Aberdeen, then Washington, then the music world. It became a legend about forgiveness, about second chances, about how the people who hurt us can sometimes teach us the most important lessons. Tom ran Melody Music Shop until he died in 2003. He never charged another young musician for studio advice. He gave away more free guitar strings than he could count, and he told every teenager the same thing. If you create something that matters to you, fight for it. Don't let anyone make you believe it's worthless. I learned that from Kurt Cobain. Kurt's death in April 1994 devastated Tom. He closed his store for a week and cried. Not just for the loss of an incredible artist, but for someone who'd shown him what grace looked like. Kurt could have humiliated him on that stage. Instead, he'd given him redemption. The cassette still hangs in Melody Music Shop, now run by Tom's daughter. It's a pilgrimage site for Nirvana fans. But more importantly, it's a reminder that our worst moments don't define us, that apologies matter, that admitting you're wrong takes more courage than pretending you're right. Tom taught Kurt that rejection can be fuel. Kurt taught Tom that forgiveness can be freedom. And together, they showed thousands that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is admit you were wrong and ask for a second chance. That's not weakness, that's strength.